soon as we kind of came to a stop, they lost all power on the plane, so the captain couldn't really communicate with us. The flight attendants had like a portable bullhorn that they were talking to everybody, saying, asking us to stay in our seats, stay off your cell phones, we're going to, evacuate the plane, and we need everybody's attention, all the stuff that you would expect them to say.
Well, there's no indication there's anything wrong with the mechanics, and this is a very standard aircraft. Think about the MD-88, kind of a standard size for a commercial aircraft, weighs between 150,000 and 80,000 pounds if it were completely empty. So at the end of a flight like this, based on the passengers, the cargo, and the fuel load, it'd be somewhere in between. They're more on the lower side. And the cruising speed is about 500 miles an hour. All of the physics here matter because of LaGuardia Airport. Look at the length of this runway. If you talk about LaGuardia Airport, you're talking about a runway that is about 7,000 feet long, the one they were aiming for there, compared to other runways nearby. Look at that. Newark, more than 11,000 feet. JFK, more than 14,000 feet. Much more room to work with as they come in and try to execute a series of maneuvers with those mechanics you mentioned, Jake. Their first one is they've got to get that speed down before they hit the asphalt here to about 155 miles per hour. One of the ways they do that is they flare the aircraft as they bring it in. You felt that when you're in a plane where it feels like it sort of leans back as it touches down. That's flaring. There's a particular warning with this plane that you don't want to flare too much because it flies very well and it will want to take off on you again. So that's the first step. Second step, they've got to reverse the thrusters and apply the brakes and try to crank it down to about 70 miles an hour. So you're more than halving your speed here in a very short distance on this runway. And then the thrusters are out of the picture, and just with the brakes, you're trying to get it down to 30 miles an hour, which would be a taxiing speed for a plane like this. And obviously didn't work this time, Jake. Somewhere around the middle of the runway here, they had lost control completely, and that's where they went off. What happened with the mechanics? Well, maybe the mechanics all worked right, but we mentioned that flaring issue. Maybe the plane never totally set down on the runway. Maybe they just lost traction on the ice the same way you do with your car. Or maybe there was some kind of a crosswind or something that helped lift a little bit and move it off. A lot of questions for investigators, Jake.
Reporters on the scene for you as we continue to bring you team coverage of this Delta Flight 1086 inbound from Atlanta. Let's get right now to Tony Aiello with the very latest from there. Tony, what can you tell us?
Mary, we're upstairs at Terminal D. This is the departure deck where people normally would come up, get out of their vehicles, grab their luggage, and head on into the terminal. You can see behind me it has been turned into a staging area. As we drove up to the airport about 15 or 20 minutes ago, this line of ambulances from Long Island Jewish Hospital were roaring down the service road. They've pulled up here to the top of the departure platform for Terminal D. They're staged. We believe that if there are any injuries that need to be taken to a local hospital, that they'll be brought out here. We've got FDNY on the scene. Of course, we have Port Authority on the scene as well. And a number of passengers are showing up, finding out that the airport is temporarily closed and trying to decide whether it's best to go back home, back to their hotel, or to go wait it out inside the terminal. I had a very odd moment here because one of the first people I saw when I pulled up and got out of the vehicle was the television talk show host Phil Donahue. He had just realized that the airport was closed. He told me he was on his way to Florida and he was going to get back in his car and I guess go back to his apartment. So I don't want to call it chaotic or confusing here, but obviously you can kind of feel the concern in the air. Lots of emergency vehicles here, lots of first responders. I've seen some assistant chiefs from the FDNY, Port Authority personnel on the scene, and of course these ambulances back here from Long Island Jewish Hospital. Although to this point, and we're more than an hour now since this happened, we have not seen any people being brought out of the terminal in need of any kind of medical assistance. I did talk briefly to a woman who was on the plane. She's downstairs in a holding area. She said everyone's just trying to catch their breath and process what they've been through, the hard landing and the plane hitting the fence, and then, of course, the emergency evacuation. So that's the story from here at Terminal D. As soon as we have some more, we'll get back to you. Reporting live at LaGuardia, Tony Aiello, CBS 2 News. News.
Tony, before we let you go, we've been looking at the ambulances on the runway by the plane, but as we look behind you, we can see how many others are there at the ready just in case.
I see at least 6 ambulances here, Mary. Most of them, again, from Long Island Jewish, North Shore LIJ Hospital. There's also some ambulances here that have the FDNY logo on them. My photographer colleague Nick Fisher is going to swing around, and you can see on the ramp that leads from the main road up to this upper level of Terminal D, you can see there's even more ambulances staging over there. Here's Truck 10, NYPD, the ESU unit. They're on the scene as well. So lots of activity here. They're ready clearly for a mass casualty incident, which doesn't necessarily mean lots of people injured or lots of people killed, because we certainly haven't heard anything along those lines, but they're ready for what they call a mass casualty incident. They're on the scene here mostly as a precaution, depending how much depending on how things develop. But right now we're just in a holding pattern, literally waiting to see if anyone is brought out of the terminal in need of medical assistance. Mary, Chris.
Tony, I know it's a chaotic situation there. I know there have been dozens of flights that were canceled before this incident even happened. Is the airport even crowded, with the exception of the emergency vehicles? Is it a crowded scene there or not?
I popped into Terminal D for a couple of minutes. It didn't look more crowded than you would expect on a Thursday afternoon. They seem to have things under control. I haven't met, I've talked to 4 or 5 passengers who were arriving, and Phil Donahue, the old newsman that he is, was the only one who was aware of what had happened here. All the other passengers telling me, oh boy, I had no idea. I was just, concerned about making my flight. And so now, again, some of them are going to hang here and hope that the airport reopens soon, and others will go back into the city, go back to their homes, go back to their hotels, and wait it out and try to get out on another flight later today or perhaps even tomorrow.
And Tony, we know 125 passengers on board, 5 crew members on board. You've already had a chance to talk to one of those passengers. What a frightening ordeal this must have been.
Yeah, I talked briefly to a woman from Atlanta, and she said it was frightening, but people have caught their breath. They're obviously very glad to be in a safe location. They're down in a holding room, either Terminal D or Terminal C, which is right next door. She wasn't 100% sure, and she said people were just catching their breath. Everyone was getting on the phone to tell their loved ones that they were okay. This plane left Atlanta. I actually wrote it down here. The plane left Atlanta around 9:23 this morning. Landed a little bit after 11 o'clock, and obviously quite a story these folks will have to tell about landing at LaGuardia and skidding off the end of the runway in what is really nasty weather conditions. I mean, this fine misty snow has been coming down all morning, while the Port Authority operations team here at LaGuardia Airport obviously doing their best to try to keep the runway clear and to have flight operations be as safe as possible. This incident still happened. Obviously there will be a full after-incident review by the Port Authority, by the airline involved, Delta, to try to figure out what exactly happened, what were the situations, what were the conditions in the cockpit, and what were the conditions of the landing that led to this incident here that has shut down LaGuardia.
All right, Tony, thanks so much.